Greetings, space nerds. Are you loving this podcast so far? Well, Are We There Yet is supported by listeners just like you. So consider showing your support with a financial contribution to WMFE. You can do that by visiting wmfe.org/support. Your gift helps us better explore exploration. Thanks. From the studios at WMFE in Orlando, Florida, this is the Space Exploration Podcast that asks the question, are we there yet? Hi, I'm Brendan Byrne. Before we send humans to Mars, we're exploring the red planet with rovers. We talked a bit about Mars 2020, that's the next Martian rover, in an earlier episode of this podcast, but I want to revisit that. And that's because NASA reached a critical milestone in the development of the rover. They're moving to the final phase of design, and we're getting more details on the science experiments on board. And you know what's really cool? Engineers are slapping a microphone on Mars 2020. We're going to hear what the surface of Mars sounds like. Do you know how happy that makes a radio producer like me? Well, to talk more about the equipment on Mars 2020 and how the development is progressing, I've invited fellow space journalist Emily Speck to the studio to talk all things rovers. Emily Speck writes for the Orlando Sentinel's Go for Launch. Emily, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
So NASA reached a major milestone on the development of the Mars 2020 rover. It's ready to head to final design and construction. Give me a sense of what this rover is going to look like and what it's going to do on Mars.
The Mars 2020 rover is going to look a lot like its, smaller twin, Curiosity, Mars rover that's currently on the red planet, but it's going to have some really great improved features. So it's going to be a little bit bigger. The science instruments are going to be different. You know, its tires, wheels are going to be different. But it's going to look pretty similar. They're going to use that basic outline to build it.
Roughly the same size, right?
Yeah. It's about the size of like a large car.
And so some upgrades on the science on board. What are some cool things that jump out at you that are going to be put on Mars 2020?
Yeah, there's 7 science instruments that were selected for this. There are pretty much all different from Curiosity. So, again, it's not quite like the onboard lab that Curiosity has, because this rover, its main goal is to really prepare for human arrival. And so it's looking at past life that may have existed on Mars. And so some of those, science instruments, like one of them is Sherlock. We've talked about that before. That one is going to be essentially analyzing the properties of the Martian soil and looking for, those properties of life, those live carbons and things like that. So that's exciting. Then there's Moxie. Moxie is going to produce oxygen from the Martian air. So that's kind of pretty essential for human life. And one of the main goals of Mars 2020 is to take the natural elements and look at them as, possible fuel sources for human arrival and all these things that we really need if we're going to set up camp there on the red planet.
And if you watched The Martian or read the book, you would have seen Moxie in action. So a little bit of science fiction coming to life on Mars
cool.
2020.
Yeah.
You talked about the drill, right? Sherlock's the drill. Tell me a little bit about that drill. I know you spoke with some of the scientists working on that in the past, and I think that's kind of interesting. Let's talk about the drill.
Yeah, I did. So I talked to Luther Beagle, who's the principal investigator on the Sherlock drill. The Sherlock drill part of it is going to be on the arm of the rover. So just like Curiosity has the arm that takes selfies and does stuff like that, Mars 2020 is going to have kind of a amped up arm with a lot of different science instruments and cameras on it. So Sherlock is going to be loaded up with this sensitive UV Raman light scanner, which is going to be the first to be used on the red planet. So that's pretty cool. This laser-based instrument, it shines light on the Martian surface and reflects, and it measures the light reflected back. So the colors that come back from this can tell us a lot about the minerals and the organic compounds on Mars. So that's pretty cool because, from there we can take that, or scientists can take that and say, okay, so were the compounds there for life, 400 billion years ago or more recently? So that's pretty exciting. It's also going to be looking at aqueous environment, like water environments. And to see, where those existed and what happened to those, because we do know that there was once water on Mars, possibly oceans. So we got to find out, over time what happened to that and if it's possible that they could return.
I know this is a future mission, but this is kind of laying the groundwork for a sample return mission. Can you talk to me about what you know about plans for that?
Yeah, so right now, Mars 2020 is going to be, it's essentially, I think it's going to take 7 core samples. So there are not plans for its return yet, but eventually they want to send, another mission to pick up those samples and bring them back to Earth, this would be the first time we would ever have our hands on Martian samples. So from that, we can do so much more on Earth in our labs than we can, with Curiosity or Mars 2020 on the planet, because our labs down here are so much better. I mean, we can analyze those samples, till the cows come home and learn so much from them. So that would be very exciting. But right now, Mars 2020, it's going to launch in 2020, but I do not know when the samples will return. And I don't think NASA knows that either.
Yeah, and it's kind of an
yeah.
idea. And
Yeah.
it should be noted that you bring up a good point. There's only so much you can do because the lab equipment has to fit onto the rover itself.
Right.
So you're very limited with what you have there.
Yeah. So, it would be amazing to get those samples back on Earth and learn what we can from them. So,
Well, we have another sample return mission coming up.
yes.
So Osiris-Rex, which I'm sure we'll talk about later this summer.
Yes. That's a different one, and that one's going to take a long time too. It's going to be a 7-year round trip. It's going to visit Bennu, the asteroid out there that it's potentially hazardous to Earth, but don't worry, it'll probably be all right.
And that's launching from our backyard, so that's always fun.
Yeah, and this one is going to launch from our backyard too.
That's true.
We don't know the launch vehicle yet, so that'll be interesting. I mean, my theory is it'll probably be, an Alice 5, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think SLS or anything will be ready by then, right?
No. I mean, had my fingers crossed maybe for like the SpaceX, Falcon Heavy or something like that, but I'm not sure if it'll be a medium-sized launch vehicle, so they probably won't need that.
Well, let's talk about some of the engineering changes in Mars 2020. You mentioned briefly earlier that there's some changes from Curiosity to Mars 2020. What are some of those changes?
Yeah. So one of the big engineering changes is the landing capabilities. So it's going to, before, Curiosity, when it was essentially dropped on the planet via this kind of sumo sky crane hovercraft thing, it was very crazy. When they were dropping it, it was selecting the area of target, while Mars 2020 is going to be able to have a larger kind of range to pick from. And, it's going to have a more accurate landing. So that's great because once they land, the rover, they won't have to travel as far. The rover won't have to drive as far to get to different science targets. So that's exciting. Also there's the wheels. They're going to be thicker. They have this advanced aluminum. There's new tread for steep climbing. So it's, it's going to be like an off-roading machine.
If you look at pictures from Curiosity, those wheels are getting destroyed. They're getting really torn up, right?
Yeah. And JPL has done a really good job of tracking the tread wear. It's just like the tires on your car. You can't drive them forever, but on Mars, there's no, store to take them to,
right.
and can't just pull into Brookstone or whatever and be like, put some new tires on this sucker. No, those have to go forever, so they really want to make these last. So these are going to be more durable and better for steeper climbing and things like that. So hopefully the rover does not get stuck. Yeah.
And talk briefly about that landing system, the Sky Crane landing system. It's pretty insane how it works, and they're doing it again.
Essentially, they lower the rover travels through space to the red planet, and then the Sky Crane hovers on the planet and drops the rover. It's like trying to think of the equivalent to that. I mean, it's been done before. They did with Curiosity, but they've referred to it as the 12 minutes of just
suspense,
absolute suspense and chaos, because if you drop this in the wrong way or you drop it too high, it's done for, and then there goes billions of dollars. So this the Sky Crane, essentially, I mean, it is just that. It is a crane that is dropping the rover on the planet, and it has to land in a precise way, otherwise,
but the crane is not actually on the ground. It's
No,
being suspended by
it's
these
like,
thrusters, and it's
yeah,
insane.
it's so futuristic. That's the thing. If you look at pictures of it, it kind of looks like almost kind of like a Star Trek, like hoverboard type thing with just dropping, and it's essentially reverse thrusting on the planet, so like blowing air up to keep the craft up, and then dropping the rover. So
I'll post a video of the animation on the website at wmfe.org/are we there yet, but it's really, really cool.
It is really, really cool. And you can also watch the videos, you might post this one, but the video of the actual landing from Curiosity. So that's it's crazy.
Yeah, no, it's pretty insane, and they're going to do it again. But I was reading they're actually going to have some software on this on the new rover that will actually look at landing sites and can change its trajectory and its landing site based on maps that technicians are feeding and saying, this is a bad zone, don't land there, this is a good zone there. It's pretty cool stuff, right?
Yeah, I think it's called the range trigger or something. I'm not sure if that's the whole name of the program, but yeah, it's going to essentially make sure that when it's landing, it's got a bigger area of target it can land from, but make sure that it really lands where it's supposed to, and say, oh, this is not safe, let's go over here. And it should happen, fingers crossed, like efficiently, so that there's no issues. But it's just, it's amazing that they've really been able to improve on this rover and all the features we're going to see because of Curiosity.
Yeah.
It's been building blocks and things like that. So,
and to your point, having that pinpoint drop site, it lowers the amount of wear and tear that's put on the vehicle, so that it can actually extend its mission and keep going.
Yeah, that's so important. I know that's something that I've talked to about a lot of. With Curiosity, the team, they'll say, okay, Curiosity sees this, in the Gale crater, let's go look at it. But first they have to be like, okay, let's discuss it, let's figure out how we're going to get there, what's the best way to get there, because they can't just say, okay, GPS, go, and it goes, and they have to really consider the terrain and how long it's going to take to get there, and the wear it's going to take on the tires, and then whether it's going to be worth it to get there if they're going to be able to analyze something new, if it's not different than what they've seen before. So I think that'll really help with that targeted area. So,
well, let's talk about what I think is the coolest thing on Mars 2020. There's actually a microphone on this. What are we going to be hearing from the surface of Mars?
So I think when NASA issued the press release saying that this bad boy is going to go into production, they're getting ready to build it, they were saying, we're going to hear things we've never heard before. There have been microphones on different vehicles that have visited Mars before, but not ever one that's been on the actual Martian surface. So we're going to hear the dramatic sounds of the landing. We're going to hear it roving around on the red planet. And that's going to be really, really cool, because not only is it going to sound cool for, of course, you want to, you want to take that and have that on the podcast, but they're going to be able to learn things from those sounds too. They're going to hear the rover working, and it's just like if you're driving your car and your car is making a weird noise, you'll be able to learn from that data, and so it's going to be the same kind of thing. They're going to learn from that, but it's going to be really exciting because we've seen the sights, on Mars, and we've never been able to hear and see them at the same time. So it's really going to be a new, just that like audio experience. I'm really excited about it too. So.
As a radio producer, I'm very excited as well. It's going to be really cool.
Yeah.
So a lot of science equipment planned for the Mars 2020. We've talked about it. A lot of this science is looking at the ability to utilize the resources there to support human exploration. Emily Speck, how does this play into the larger plan of putting humans on Mars?
Sure. So, talking about, going back to Curiosity a minute, Curiosity has been looking for evidence of habitable conditions. So that's what Curiosity's been doing. And then building on that, Mars 2020 is asking, was life once there? And then from there, we can say, can it be there again? It's going to use the natural resources to possibly support life and provide fuel for humans. So that's really essential if we're going to send humans there. It's really preparing us for human arrival.
It's pretty wild that's the step that we're at this point, is looking at how to utilize the resources there. And really paving the way for astronauts. It's kind of a reality check. It's like, hey, this is happening, right?
It is a really reality check. I mean, we've had a few of those, I think, in the last couple of months with SpaceX saying they've moved up their timeline to get there. And then with Mars 2020, it's 4 years away, but in those 4 years, I think we're going to see a lot of progress in the journey to Mars and those missions. So I think, fingers crossed, I hope that Mars 2020 will not be the only resident of Mars for a long time. I hope there will be some other people joining it that are not robotic.
I hope so, too. Mars 2020 sounds like a pretty boring name. That's not the final name, right?
No, it's not the final name, but they have 4 years, so they're going to rename it, like Curiosity. Obviously, that's kind of a fun name. I'm not sure what they're going to name it, though, so we'll see. I hope it's something good. I'm sure we'll all follow it on Twitter once it gets a Twitter handle.
Do you have any ideas for a name?
The Martianator.
The Martianator. I'm thinking since there's a microphone on there, they might want to name it after, maybe 2 podcast folks, like the Spec Burn rover, right?
I really like that. Or, somebody like really famous, like the Shapiro or
there you
something.
Go.
Or,
the R.E. Shapiro.
Yeah,
I like
there
it.
You go.
We've been talking about Mars 2020, soon to be renamed, with Emily Speck. She writes for the Orlando Sentinel's Go for Launch blog. Be sure to check it out at orlandosentinel.com/goforlaunch or follow her on Twitter. She's at EMSpec. Emily, thanks again for joining the program.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that's it for this episode. Those videos are online. You can see those on our website at wmfe.org/arewethereyet. Support for this podcast come from the listeners of WMFE Orlando. Follow the show online. We're on Twitter at AWTYMars. Are we there yet? Get it? Or reach out to me in the Twitterverse. I'm at Space Brendan. Leave us a review on iTunes. That's how more people learn about the podcast. Are We There Yet is a production of WMFE, and our theme music was composed by Kevin McLeod. Find more space news online at wmfe.org/space. I'm Brendan Byrne. Thanks for listening.